Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those beyond the binary. It's another glorious Thursday evening in June of 2020, and you bet your whole butt it's bedtime, brother. Hi, everybody. My name's Colin, and I'm Brother Bedtime. I only come out when it's bedtime, which is how you know it's bedtime, because here I am, and there you are, presumably. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful day, that the winds of fate and the buffeting currents of change have been kind to you, and that good fortune has come your way. And that's about the extent of my spell casting. It's just like hoping that good stuff happens to people. Um, Today was a nice day for me. I got to see my buddy Andy, who works for the library, and we went for a nice brief walk. Nothing like my hashtag long walk the other night where I was out and about for 7 hours or so. And we ended up getting some soul fried chicken, very tasty stuff, and then dining in the park where there were a bunch of other people sort of scattered around in their little people pods. It was nice to get out of the house, and the weather was gorgeous too, so I really enjoyed myself. I know that Marin cooked a pizza. That's a remarkable feat of culinary ingenuity that I have yet to even begin to attempt. Things like pies and pizzas and breads, anything where you need to build the base of the dough first sounds incredibly daunting to me. Maybe one day I'll cross that bridge, but today is not that day. Oh, we gonna make a pizza, says Sam. Sam's got a little more culinary expertise than I am, so with her at the helm, I'm sure we could do no great wrong, at least as far as the kitchen is concerned. Today we will be, of course, continuing on with our journey, or should I say voyage, of the Dawn Treader. We are now 4 chapters in, or 3 chapters in, and this will be the 4th of those chapters. And depending on how we're all feeling after the end of the first one, this is a Thursday night, and I was talking about trying out maybe going a little bit longer on Thursday nights, making them a bit more of a fun time, casual hangout and stuff. So I'll check in after we get through the chapter and see how folks are feeling. But yeah, I think that's basically it. This evening's beverage consists of a deliciously crisp glass of water and a lukewarm half can of Canada Dry ginger ale. What seems to be the matter there, tech support? My very good dwarf is skulking around behind the lines. Things seem fine. Things seem fine. They seem just fine. You made it, Lance. Hello, welcome. We're just about to get going here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Have you guys arrived out east? I guess it is. You were driving out to Saskatchewan, or yesterday you were driving through Saskatchewan. I hope you've made it and you've landed safely. I assume that you must be in no dire straits since you have the time to tune into the stream. Frozen for everyone or just for me, says Sam with bells on. Oh my god, do we have more technical difficulties? I even plugged in the laptop and everything. Well, we're going to chance it. We're going to dive into the story. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 4. What Caspian Did There. There being the Lone Islands. You'll recall that they've just rendezvoused with the first of 7 lords they've gone to find, the Lord Byrne, who settled down on this island with a nice wife and had a couple of lovely daughters and hasn't seen too much action since he was basically exiled from Narnia by the traitorous usurper Miraz. It was lagging intermittently for Marin and Sam. Well, it sounds like it's all good now, so once again, I invite everybody to sit back, relax, take a sip of whatever you got in front of you, and enjoy Chapter 4, What Caspian Did There. Next morning, the Lord Byrne called his guests early, and after breakfast he asked Caspian to order every man he had into full armor. And above all, he added, let everything be as trim and scoured as if it were the morning of the first battle in a great war between noble kings and all the world looking on. This was done. And then in 3 boatloads Caspian and his people, and Byrne with a few of his, put out for Narrowhaven. The king's flag flew in the stern of his boat, and his trumpeter was with him. When they reached the jetty at Narrowhaven, Caspian found a considerable crowd assembled to meet them. "This is what I sent word about last night," said Byrne. "They are all friends of mine and honest people." And as soon as Caspian stepped ashore, the crowd broke out into hurrahs and shouts of "Narnia! Narnia! Long live the king!" At the same moment, and this was also due to Byrne's messengers, bells began ringing from many parts of the town. Then Caspian caused his banner to be advanced, and his trumpet to be blown, and every man drew his sword and set his face into a joyful sternness. And they marched up the street, so that the street shook, and their armor shone, for it was a sunny morning, so that one could hardly look at it steadily. At first, the only people who cheered were those who had been warned by Byrne's messenger, and all knew what was happening and wanted it to happen. At first, the only people who cheered were those who had been warned by Byrne's messenger and knew what was happening and wanted it to happen. Then all the children joined in because they liked a procession and had seen very few. And then all the schoolboys joined in because they also liked processions and felt that the more noise and disturbance there was, the less likely they would have to have any school that morning. And then all the old women put their heads out of doors and windows and began chattering and cheering because it was a king, and what is a governor compared with that? And all the young women joined in for the same reason, and also because Caspian and Drinian and the rest were so handsome. Oh, they're just so handsome. And then all the young men came to look at what the young women were looking at, so that by the time Caspian reached the castle gates, nearly the whole town was shouting, and where Gumpus sat in the castle, muddling and messing about with accounts and forms and rules and regulations, he heard the noise. There's an excellent little sketch here of the procession winding its way through the streets of Narrowhaven, and the various demographics all being wooed in their turn by the spectacle, for various novel reasons, of course. At the castle gate, Caspian's trumpeter blew a blast and cried, "Open for the High King of Narnia, come to visit his trusty and well-beloved servant, the governor of the Lone Island." In those days, everything in the islands was done in a slovenly, slouching manner. Only the little postern opened, and out came a tousled little fellow with a dirty old hat on his head instead of a helmet, and a rusty old pike in his hand. He blinked at the flashing figures before him. "Can't seize efficiency. Can't seize efficiency," he mumbled, which was his way of saying, "You can't see his sufficiency." "No interviews, set appointments between 9-10 p.m. second Saturday every month." "Uncover before Narnia, you dog!" thundered the Lord Byrne, and dealt him a rap with his gauntleted hand, which sent his hat flying from his head. "Oh, what's it all about?" began the doorkeeper, but no one took any notice of him. Oof. Hard out here for a doorkeeper, that's for sure. Two of Caspian's men stepped through the postern, and after some struggling with bars and bolts, for everything was rusty, flung both wings of the gate wide open. Then the king and his followers strode into the courtyard. Here a number of the governor's guards were lounging about, and several more, they were mostly wiping their mouths, came tumbling out of various doorways. Though their armor was in a disgraceful condition, these were fellows who might have fought if they had been led or had known what was happening, so this was the dangerous moment. Caspian gave them no time to think. "Where is the captain?" he asked. "I am, more or less, if you know what I mean," said a languid and rather dandified young person without any armor at all. Ooh, languid and rather dandified? Let me try it again. "I am, more or less, if you know what I mean," said a languid and rather dandified young person without any armor at all. "It is our wish," said Caspian, "that our royal visitation to our realm of the Lone Islands should, if possible, be an occasion of joy and not of terror to our local subjects. If it were not for that, I should have something to say about the state of your men's armor and weapons. As it is, you are pardoned. Command a cask of wine to be opened, that your men may drink our health. But at noon tomorrow I wish to see them here in this courtyard, looking like men of arms, and not like vagabonds. See to it on pain of our extreme displeasure." The captain gaped, but Byrne immediately cried out, "Three cheers for the king!" And the soldiers, who had understood about the cask of wine, even if they understood nothing else, joined in. Caspian then ordered most of his own men to remain in the courtyard. He, with Byrne and Drinian and 4 others, went into the hall. Behind a table at the far end with various secretaries about him sat his sufficiency, the governor of the Lone Islands. Gumpus was a bilious-looking man, with hair that had once been red and was now mostly gray. He glanced up at the strangers as the strangers entered, and then looked down at his papers, saying automatically, "No interviews without appointments, except between 9 and 10 p.m. on second Saturdays." Caspian nodded to Byrne, and then stood aside. Byrne and Drinian took a step forward, and each seized one end of the table. They lifted it and flung it over on one side of the hall, where it rolled over, scattering a cascade of letters, dossiers, inkpots, pens, sealing wax, and documents. Then, not roughly, but as firmly as if their hands were pincers of steel, they plucked Gumpus out of his chair and deposited him, facing it about 4 feet away. Caspian at once sat down in the chair and laid his naked sword across his knees. Wow! What a power move from Caspian and the good old boys. This is my chair now. Also, your table's broken. Tough beans. Here, we can see Drinian and Byrne smashing what is assuredly an heirloom piece of furniture for the better recognition of Caspian's authority. Let's see if we can get that to focus up. It's really quite an imposing picture. The black background lends it a sort of sinister air, I think. Well, looks like that is about as we're going to get today. "My lord," he said, fixing his eyes on Gumpus, "you have not given us quite the welcome we expected. We are the king of Narnia." "Nothing about it in the correspondence," said the governor. "Nothing in the minutes. We have not been notified of any such thing. All irregular. Happy to consider any applications." "And we are come to inquire into your sufficiency's conduct of your office," continued Caspian. "There are 2 points especially on which I require an explanation. Firstly, I find no record that the tribute due from these islands to the crown of Narnia has been received for about 150 years. "That would be a question to raise at the council next month," said Gumpus. "If anyone moves that a commission of inquiry be set up to report on the financial history of the islands at the first meeting next year, why then—" "I also find it very clearly written in our laws," Caspian went on, "that if the tribute is not delivered, the whole debt has to be paid by the governor of the Lone Islands out of his private purse." At this, Gumpus began to pay real attention. "Oh, that's quite out of the question," he said. "It is an economic impossibility. Your Majesty must be joking." This sounds a lot like if the Queen showed up in Canada and was just like, "Hey, you guys haven't paid taxes." And we were like, "Well, you haven't exactly been around. Can't you give us a pass?" Inside, he was wondering if there were any way of getting rid of these unwelcome visitors. He had known that Caspian had only one ship, or had he known that Caspian had only one ship and one ship's company with him, he would have spoken soft words for the moment and hoped to have them all surrounded and killed during the night. But he had seen a ship of war sail down the straits yesterday, and seen it signaling, as he supposed, to its consorts. He had not then known it was the king's ship, for there was not wind enough to spread the flag out and make the golden lion visible, so he had waited further developments. Now he imagined that Caspian had a whole fleet at Bernstead. It would never have occurred to Gumpus that anyone would walk into Narrowhaven to take the islands with less than 50 men. It was certainly not at all the kind of thing he could imagine himself doing. "Secondly," said Caspian, "I want to know why you have permitted this abominable and unnatural traffic in slaves to grow up here, contrary to the ancient custom and usage of our domains."
"Necessary, unavoidable," said his sufficiency. "An essential part of the economic development of the islands, I assure you. Our present burst of prosperity depends on it."
"What need have you of slaves?"
"For export, your majesty. Sell 'em to Calormen mostly, and we have other markets. We are a great center of the trade."
"In other words," said Caspian, "you don't need them. Tell me what purpose they serve except to put money into the pockets of such as Pug."
"Your majesty's tender years," said Gumpus, with what was meant to be a fatherly smile, "hardly make it possible that you should understand the economic problem involved. I have statistics, I have graphs, I have—"
"Tender as my years may be," said Caspian, "I believe I understand the slave trade from within quite as well as your sufficiency, and I do not see that it brings into the islands meat, or bread, or beer, or wine, or timber, or cabbages, or books, or instruments of music, or horses, or armor, or anything else worth having. But whether it does or not, it must be stopped."
"But that would be putting the clock back," gasped the governor. "Have you no idea of progress, of development?"
"I have seen them both in an egg," said Caspian. "We call it going bad in Narnia. This trade must stop."
"I can take no responsibility for any such measure," said Gumpus.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting a lot of parallels between the world in this little section here right now. Little on the nose for a toasty Thursday evening. "Very well, then," answered Caspian. "We relieve you of your office. My Lord Byrne, come here." And before Gumpus quite realized what was happening, Byrne was kneeling with his hands between the king's hands and taking the oath to govern the Lone Islands in accordance with the old customs, rights, usages, and laws of Narnia. And Caspian said, "I think we have had enough of governors," and made Byrne a duke, the Duke of the Lone Islands. "As for you, my lord," he said to Gumpus, "I forgive you your debt for the tribute. But before noon tomorrow, you and yours must be out of the castle, which is now the Duke's residence."
"Look here, this is all very well," said one of Gumpus's secretaries.
"Oh, it's not Gumpus. All right,
"Look here, this is all very well," said one of Gumpus's secretaries. "But suppose all you gentlemen stop play-acting and we do a little business, The question before us really is—"
"The question is," said the Duke, "whether you and the rest of the rabble will leave without a flogging or with one. You may choose which you prefer." When all this had been pleasantly settled, Caspian ordered horses, of which there were a few in the castle, though a very ill-groomed, and he, with Byrne and Drinian and a few others, rode out into the town and made for the slave market. It was a long, low building near the harbor, and the scene which they found going on inside was very much like any other auction. That is to say, there was a great crowd, and Pug, on a platform, was roaring out in a raucous voice, "Now, gentlemen, lot 23, fine Terebinthian agricultural laborer, suitable for the mines or the galleys. Under 25 years of age, not a bad tooth in his head. Good brawny fellow. Take off his shirt tacks and let the gentleman see you. There's muscle for you. Look at the chest on him. 10 crescents from the gentleman in the corner. You must be joking, sir. 15, 18. 18 is bidden for lot 23. Any advance on 18? 21. Thank you, sir. 21 is bidden. But Pug stopped and gaped when he saw the mail-clad figures who had clanked up to the platform. On your knees, every man of you, to the King of Narnia, said the Duke. Everyone heard the horses jingling and stamping outside, and many had heard some rumor of the landing and the events at the castle. Most obeyed. Those who did not were pulled down by their neighbors. Some cheered. Your life is forfeit, Pug, for laying hands on our royal person yesterday, said Caspian. But your ignorance is pardoned. The slave trade was forbidden in all our dominions 1/4 of an hour ago. I declare every slave in this market free. 1/4 of an hour ago. My God. How the times have changed, eh? He held up his hand to check the cheering of the slaves and went on. Where are my friends? That dear little girl and the nice young gentleman, said Pug with an ingratiating smile. Why, they were snapped up at once. We're here, Caspian, cried Lucy and Edmund together. At your service, sire. Oh, at your service, sire, peeped Reepicheep from another corner. They had all been sold, but the men who had bought them there were staying to bid for other slaves, and so they had not yet been taken away. The crowd parted to let the 3 of them out, and there was great hand-clasping and greeting between them and Caspian. 2 merchants of Calormen at once approached. The Calormen have dark faces and long beards. They wear flowing robes and orange-colored turbans, and they are a wise, wealthy, courteous, cruel, and ancient people. They bowed most politely to Caspian and paid him long compliments, all about the fountains of prosperity irrigating the gardens of prudence and virtue, and things like that. But of course, what they wanted was the money they had paid. That is only fair, sirs, said Caspian. Every man who has bought a slave today must have his money back. Pug, bring out your takings to the last minim. A minim is the 40th part of a crescent. Does your majesty mean to beggar me? whined Pug. You have lived on broken hearts all your life, said Caspian, and if you are beggared, it is better to be a beggar than a slave. But where is my other friend? Oh, him, said Pug. Oh, take him, and welcome. Glad to have him off my hands. I've never seen such a drug in the market all my born days. Priced him at 5 crescents, and in the end, nobody'd even have him. Threw him in free with other lots, and still nobody would have him. Wouldn't touch him. Wouldn't look at him. Tax, bring out Sulky. Then Eustace was produced. And sulky he certainly looked. For though no one would want to be sold as a slave, it is perhaps even more galling to be a sort of utility slave whom no one will buy. He walked up to Caspian and said, I see. As usual. Been enjoying yourself somewhere while the rest of us were prisoners. I suppose you haven't even found out about the British consul. Of course not. God, this kid, man. Can't stand this kid. Oh, Caspian, lend me the strength to tell the adults in my life sometimes the economy is wrong. Preach. Oh, preach, Sister Marin. Yeah, man, the kids are all right. As a brief sidebar, I was at the protest last week for the Black Lives Matter here in movement in Edmonton, and it was astonishingly populated by an overwhelming majority of people in their teens and early 20s and people of the younger demographic. They seem to have the spirit, the will, and the conviction to change things. I love kids, man. Kids. The kids are all right. Not that you're a kid, Marin. I just count you in with that slightly younger demographic. I mean, we're more or less the same generation. That night, they had a great feast in the castle of Narrowhaven. And then, tomorrow for the beginning of our real adventures, said Reepicheep, when he had made his bows to everyone and went to bed. But it could not really be tomorrow or anything like it, for now they were preparing to leave all known lands and seas behind them, and the fullest preparations had to be made. The Dawn Treader was emptied and drawn on land by 8 horses over rollers, and every bit of her was gone over by the most skilled shipwrights. Then she was launched again, and victualled and watered as full as she could hold, that is to say, for 28 days. Even this, as Edmund noticed with disappointment, only gave them a fortnight's eastward sailing before they had to abandon their quest. While all this was being done, Caspian missed no chance of questioning all the oldest sea captains whom he could find in Narrowhaven, to learn if they had any knowledge or even any rumors of land further to the east. He poured out many a flagon of the castle ale to weather-beaten men with short grey beards and clear blue eyes, and many a tall yarn he heard in return. But those who seemed the most truthful could tell of no lands beyond the lone islands, and many thought that if you sailed too far east, you would come into the surges of a sea without lands that swirled perpetually round the rim of the world. And that, I reckon, is where your Majesty's friends went to the bottom. The rest had only wild stories of islands inhabited by headless men, floating islands, waterspouts, and a fire that burned along the water. Only one, to Reepicheep's delight, said, "And that, and beyond that, Aslan's country. But that's beyond the end of the world, and you can't get there." But when they questioned him, he could only say that he'd heard it from his father. Byrne could only tell them that he had seen his 6 companions sail away eastward, and that nothing had ever been heard of them again. He said this when he and Caspian were standing on the highest point of Avra, looking down on the eastern ocean. I've often been up here of a morning," said the Duke, "and seen the sun come up out of the sea, and sometimes it looked as if it were only a couple of miles away. And I've wondered about my friends, and wondered what there really is behind that horizon. Nothing, most likely. Yet I am always half ashamed that I stayed behind. But I wish your Majesty wouldn't go. We may need your help here. This closing the slave market might make a new world. War with Calormen is what I foresee. My liege, think again." "I have an oath, my Lord Duke," said Caspian. "And anyway, what could I say to Reepicheep?" Here we can see Caspian being regaled by all manner of well-intentioned drunken sailors. Some with tall tales, others with legit stories. But by and large, a swarthy lot, to be sure. Let's see, how are we doing out there, folks? We're up to 9 p.m. now. Do we feel like another chapter? It'll be another probably 15 or so. What's the vibe? How's everybody feeling out there in Storyland? This next one has some really cool pictures. Do it, says Malric. Words of action are often more valuable than words of wisdom. So you know what? We're going to do it. We're going to do it, everybody. We'll never say no to more Brother Bedtime. Wow, that's a glowing review. Thank you, Marin. Although I don't foresee any marathon streams anytime soon. But that could be fun, hey? Bust out Infinite Jest and read until I pass out? Maybe for charity one day. Alrighty then. We soldier on with Chapter 5. The Storm and What Came of It. It was nearly 3 weeks after their landing that the Dawn Treader was towed out of Narrowhaven Harbor. Very solemn farewells had been spoken, and a great crowd had assembled to see her departure. There had been cheers, and tears too, when Caspian made his last speech to the lone islanders, and parted from the Duke and his family. But as the ship, her purple sails still flapping idly, drew further from the shore, and the sound of Caspian's trumpet from the poop came fainter across the water, everyone became silent. Then she came into the wind. The sails swelled out, the tug cast off, and began rowing back. The first real wave ran up under the Dawn Treader's prow, and she was a live ship again. The men off duty went below. Drinian took the first watch on the poop, and she turned her head eastward round the south of Avra. The next few days were delightful. Lucy thought she was the most fortunate girl in the world, as she woke each morning to see the reflections of the sunlit water dancing on the ceiling of her cabin, and looked round on all the nice new things she had got in the Lone Islands, sea boots and buskins and cloaks and jerkins and scarves. And then she would go on deck and take a look from the forecastle at a sea which was a brighter blue each morning, and drink in an air that was a little warmer day by day. After that came breakfast, and such an appetite as one only has at sea. She spent a good deal of time sitting on the little bench in the stern playing chess with Reepicheep. It was amusing to see him lifting the pieces, which were far too big for him, with both paws, and standing on tiptoes as if he made a move near the center of the board. He was a good player, and when he remembered what he was doing, he usually won. But every now and then Lucy won, because the mouth did something quite ridiculous, like sending a knight into the danger of a queen and castle combined. This happened because he had momentarily forgotten that it was a game of chess, and was thinking of a real battle, and making the knight do what he would certainly have done in its place. For his mind was full of forlorn hopes, death or glory charges, and last stands. That sounds lovely. I haven't played chess in a long time. But this pleasant time did not last. There came an evening when Lucy, gazing idly astern at the long furrow or wake they were leaving behind them, saw a great rack of clouds building itself up in the west with amazing speed. Then a gap was torn in it, and a yellow sunset poured through the gap. All the waves behind them seemed to take on unusual shapes, and the sea was a drab or yellowish color like a dirty canvas. The air grew cold. The ship seemed to move uneasily as if she felt danger behind her. The sail would be flat and limp one minute, and wildly full the next. While she was noting these things and wondering at a sinister change which had come over the very noise of the wind, Drinian cried, "All hands on deck!" In a moment, everyone became frantically busy. The hatches were battened down. The galley fire was put out. Men went aloft to reef the sails. Before they had finished, the storm struck them. It seemed to Lucy that a great valley in the sea opened just before their bows, and they rushed down into it, deeper down than she would have believed possible. A great grey hill of water, far higher than the mast, rushed to meet them. It looked certain death, but they were tossed to the top of it. Then the ship seemed to spin round. A cataract of water poured over the deck. The poop and forecastle were like two islands with a fierce sea between them. Up aloft, the sailors were lying out along the yard, desperately trying to get control of the sail. A broken rope stood out sideways in the wind, as straight and stiff as if it was a poker. "Get below, ma'am," bawled Drinian, "and Lucy, knowing the landsmen and landswomen are a nuisance to the crew, Sorry, that's not Drinian at all. That's just straight up Clive. "Get below, ma'am," bawled Drinian, and Lucy, knowing that landsmen and landswomen are a nuisance to the crew, began to obey. It was not easy. The Dawn Treader was listing terribly to starboard, and the deck sloped like the roof of a house. She had to clamber round to the top of the ladder, holding on to the rail, and then stand by while two men climbed up it, and then get down it as best she could. It was well she was already holding on tight, for at the foot of the ladder another wave roared across the deck, up to her shoulders. She was already almost wet through with spray and rain, but this was colder. Then she made a dash for the cabin door, and got in and shut out for a moment the appalling sight of the speed with which they were rushing into the dark. But not, of course, the horrible confusion of creakings, groanings, snappings, clatterings, roarings, and boomings which only sounded more alarming below than they had done on the poop. And all the next day, and all the next, it went on. It went on till one could hardly even remember a time before it had begun. And there always had to be 3 men at the tiller, and it was as much as 3 could do to keep any kind of course. And there always had to be men at the pump, and there was hardly any rest for anyone, and nothing could be cooked, and nothing could be dried, and one man was lost overboard, and they never saw the sun. This is our first casualty. Dang. I'm sure there were casualties in the other stories, but they were never actually detailed, were they? Well, we've lost one. I guess we're down to a crew of 30 or 29 or so now. Here we can see the swell and pitch of this vicious assault by Momo Nature herself. Poseidon, I'm sure, was in a foul mood for this little bit of text. When it was over, Eustace made the following entry in his diary. Oh boy. September 3rd, the first day for ages when I have been able to write. We have been driven before a hurricane for 13 days and nights. I know that because I kept a careful count, though the others all say it was only 12. Pleasant to be embarked on a dangerous voyage with people who can't even count right. I have had a ghastly time, up and down enormous waves, hour after hour, usually wet to the skin, and not even an attempt at giving us proper meals. Needless to say, there's no wireless or even a rocket. No wireless. Radio, that's right. There's also no Wi-Fi. Sorry, Eustace. Have to wait till you get home to check Reddit. Needless to say, there's no wireless or even a rocket, so no chance of signaling anyone for help. It all proves what I keep on telling them, the madness of setting out in a rotten little tub like this. It would have been bad enough even if one was with decent people instead of fiends in human form. Caspian and Edmund are simply brutal to me. The night we lost our mast, there's only a stump left now, though I was not at all well, they forced me to come on deck and work like a slave. Lucy shoved her oar in by saying that Reepicheep was longing to go, only he was too small. I wonder she doesn't see that everything that little beast does is all for the sake of showing off. Even at her age, she ought to have that amount of sense. Today, the beastly boat is level at last, and the sun's out and we all have been jawing about what to do. We have food enough, pretty beastly stuff most of it, to last for 16 days. The poultry were all washed overboard. Even if they hadn't been, the storm would have stopped them laying. Oh my god, those are all the live chickens. Oh, chickens! No. The real trouble is water. 2 casks seem to have got a leak knocked in them and are empty. Narnian efficiency again. On short rations, half a pint each day. We've got enough for 12 days. There's still lots of rum and wine, but even they realize that would only make them thirstier. If we could, of course, the sensible thing would be to turn west at once and make for the Lone Islands. But it took us 18 days to get where we are, running like mad with a gale behind us. Even if we got an east wind, it might take us far longer to get back. And at present, there's no sign of an east wind. In fact, there's no wind at all. As for rowing back, it would take far too long, and Caspian says the men couldn't row on half a pint of water a day. I'm pretty sure this is wrong. I tried to explain that perspiration really cools people down, so the men would need less water if they were working. He didn't take any notice of this, which is always his way when he can't think of an answer. The others all voted for going on, in hope of finding land. I felt it my duty to point out that we didn't know there was any land ahead, and tried to get them to see the dangers of wishful thinking. Instead of producing a better plan, they had to check me. They had the cheek to ask me what I proposed. So I just explained coolly and quietly that I had been kidnapped and brought away on this idiotic voyage without my consent, and it was hardly my business to get them out of the scrape. My God, there's a lot of this. So you'll just have to imagine that nasty little voice instead, because Eustace is gonna go on for a little while yet. September 4th, still becalmed. Very short rations for dinner, and I got less than anyone. Oh, it doesn't sound right to do it with Clive's voice, does it? Caspian is very clever at helping, and thinks I don't see. Lucy, for some reason, tried to make up to me by offering me some of hers, but that interfering prig Edmund wouldn't let her. Pretty hot sun. Terribly thirsty all evening. September 5th. Still becalmed and very hot. Feeling rotten all day, and I'm sure I've got a temperature. Of course, they haven't the sense to keep a thermometer on board. September 6th. A horrible day. Woke up in the night knowing I was feverish and must have a drink of water. Any doctor would have said so. Heaven knows I'm the last person to try to get any unfair advantage, but I never dreamed that this water rationing would be meant to apply to a sick man. In fact, I would have woken the others and asked for some, only I thought it would be selfish to wake them. So I just got up and took my cup and tiptoed out of the black hole we slept in, taking great care not to disturb Caspian and Edmund, for they've been sleeping badly since the heat and the short water began. I always try to consider others, whether they are nice to me or not. I got out all right into the big room, if you can call it a room, where the rowing benches and luggage are. The thing of water is at this end. All was going beautifully, but before I'd drawn a cupful, who should catch me but that little spy, Reep. I tried to explain that I was going on deck for a breath of air. The business about the water had nothing to do with him, and he asked me why I had a cup. He made such a noise that the whole ship was roused. They treated me scandalously. I asked, as I think anyone would have, why Reepicheep was sneaking about the water cask in the middle of the night. He said that he was too small to be any use on deck. He did sentry over the water every night so that one more man could go to sleep. Now comes their rotten unfairness. They all believed him. Can you beat it? I had to apologize to the dangerous little brute, or the dangerous little brute would have been at me with his sword. And then Caspian showed up in his true colors as a brutal tyrant and said out loud for everyone to hear that anyone found stealing water in future would get 2 dozen. I didn't know what this meant till Edmund explained it to me. It comes in the sort of books those Pevensey kids read. After this cowardly threat, Caspian changed his tune and started being patronizing. Said he was sorry for me, and that everyone felt just as feverish as I did, and we must all make the best of it, etc., etc. Odious stuck-up prig. Stayed in bed all day today. September 7th. A little wind today, but still from the west. Made a few miles eastward with part of the sail set on what Drinian calls the jury mast. That means the bowsprit set upright and tied, they called it lashed, to the stump of the real mast. Still terribly thirsty. Man, this kid, he might not be the most pleasant of folks, but he's having a really rough adventure. He didn't sign up for any of this. September 8th. Still sailing east. I stay in my bunk all day now and see no one except Lucy till the 2 fiends come to bed. Lucy gives me a little of her water ration. She says girls don't get as thirsty as boys. I had often thought this, but it ought to be more generally known at sea. September 9. Land in sight. A very high mountain, a long way off to the southeast. September 10. The mountain is bigger and clearer, but still a long way off. Gulls again today for the first time since I don't know how long. September 11. Caught some fish and had them for dinner. Dropped anchor at about 7 p.m. in 3 fathoms of water in a bay of this mountainous island.
That idiot Caspian wouldn't let us go ashore because it was getting dark and he was afraid of savages and wild beasts. Extra water ration tonight.
And thus is the chronicle of Eustace's rotten week aboard the Dawn Treader. Oh, that's empty. That's good agua. All this talk of water rations got me thirsty. What awaited them on this island was going to concern Eustace more than anyone else. But it cannot be told in his words because after September 11th, he forgot about keeping his diary for a long time. That's probably for the best. When morning came, with a low grey sky but very hot, the adventurers found they were in a bay encircled by such cliffs and crags that it was like a Norwegian fjord. In front of them, at the head of the bay, there was some level land heavily overgrown with cedars and trees, with trees that appeared to be cedars, through which a rapid stream came out. Beyond that was a steep ascent ending in a jagged ridge, and behind that a vague darkness of mountains which ran into dull-colored clouds so that you could not see their tops. The nearer cliffs at each side of the bay were streaked here and there with lines of white, which everyone knew to be waterfalls, though at that distance they did not show any movement or make any noise. Indeed, the whole place was very silent, and the water of the bay was smooth as glass. It reflected every detail of the cliffs. The scene would have been pretty in a picture, but was rather oppressive in real life. It was not a country that welcomed visitors. The whole ship's company went ashore in 2 boatloads, and everyone drank and washed deliciously in the river, and had a meal and a rest before Caspian sent 4 men back to keep the ship, and the day's work began. There was everything to be done. The casks must be brought ashore and the faulty ones mended if possible, and all refilled. A tree, a pine if they could get it, must be felled and made into a new mast. Sails must be repaired, a hunting party organized to shoot any game that land might yield, clothes to be washed and mended, and countless small breakages on board to be set right. For the Dawn Treader herself, and this was more obvious now that they saw her at a distance, could hardly be recognized as the same gallant ship which had left Narrowhaven. She looked like a crippled, discolored hulk which anyone might have taken for a wreck. And her officers and crew were no better. Lean, pale, red-eyed from lack of sleep, and dressed in rags. Here we can see our adventurers arriving at what I can only assume is in fact the island from Jurassic Park. It looks very wild, like they're sailing into some sort of fertile yet dangerous and ominous gorge. Let's see if I pull it out, pop it back in. Let's get that focus going on. Yeah! Check out that ship. We got those doomy clouds in the background, some lush and disgusting vegetation. Well done, sketch artist, who I believe is the same as all the other books. Let me confirm that. I believe her name is Pauline Baines. Yes, yes indeed. Nice work, Pauline. Poor Dawn Treader. Oh my god, Eustace on Reddit. I feel like Eustace would thrive on Reddit. Like, the sort of argument for argument's sake is like, that's kind of what those parts of the internet are built for in my imagination. Although, to be fair, I don't really use Reddit a ton myself. I'm sure there are lots of very wonderful and supportive and communities that are capable of engaging in critical discourse and things like that. I just imagine Eustace doing very well on Reddit. He'd maybe do better on 4chan, come to think of it. As Eustace lay under a tree and heard all these plans being discussed, his heart sank. Was there going to be no rest? It looked as if their first day on the longed-for land was going to be quite as hard work as a day at sea. Then a delightful idea occurred to him. Nobody was looking. They were all chattering about their ship as if they actually liked the beastly thing. Why shouldn't he simply slip away? Oh my god, it is Jurassic Park. No! Eustace gets into arguments on meme posts on Facebook. Yeah, he follows some really obscure groups populated with very obscure people, I'm sure. God, Eustace, no, you don't quietly slip away on an unknown island. Especially not when you're such a small child. He would take a stroll inland, find a cool, airy place up in the mountains, have a good long sleep, and not rejoin the others till the day's work was over. He felt it would do him good. But he could take great care to keep the bay and the ship in sight so as to be sure of his way back. He wouldn't like to be left in this country. He at once put his plan into action. He rose quietly from his place and walked away among the trees, taking care to go slowly and in an aimless manner so that anyone who saw him would think he was merely stretching his legs. He was surprised to find how quickly the noise of conversation died away behind him, and how very silent and warm and dark green the wood became. Soon he felt he could venture on a quicker and more determined stride. This soon brought him out of the wood. The ground began sloping steeply up in front of him. The grass was dry and slippery, but manageable if he used his hands as well as his feet. And though he panted and mopped his forehead a good deal, he plugged away steadily. This showed, by the way, that his new life, little as he suspected it, had already done him some good. The old Eustace, Harold and Alberta's Eustace, would have given up the climb after about 10 minutes. Slowly, and with several rests, he reached the ridge. Here he had expected to have a view into the heart of the island, but the clouds had now come lower and nearer, and a sea of fog was rolling to meet him. He sat down and looked back. He was now so high that the bay looked small beneath him, and miles of sea were visible. Then the fog from the mountains closed in all round him, thick but not cold, and he lay down and turned this way and that to find the most comfortable position to enjoy himself. But he didn't enjoy himself, or not for very long. He began, almost for the first time in his life, to feel lonely. At first, this feeling grew very gradually, and then he began to worry about the time. There was not the slightest sound. Suddenly, it occurred to him that he might have been lying there for hours. Perhaps the others had gone. Perhaps they had let him wander away on purpose simply in order to leave him behind. He leaped up in a panic and began the descent. At first, he tried to do it too quickly, slipped on the steep grass, and slid for several feet. Then he thought this had carried him too far to the left, and as he came up, he had seen precipices on that side. So he clambered up again, as near as he could guess to the place he had started from, and began his descent afresh, bearing to the right. After that, things seemed to be going better. He went very cautiously, for he could not see more than a yard ahead, and there was still perfect silence all around him. It is very unpleasant to have to go cautiously when there is a voice inside you saying all the time, "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" For every moment the terrible idea of being left behind grew stronger. If he had understood Caspian and the Pevensies at all, he would have known, of course, that there was not the least chance of their doing any such thing. But he had persuaded himself that they were all fiends in human form. "At last," said Eustace, as he came slithering down a slide of loose stones, scree they call it, and found himself on the level. "And now, where are those trees? There's something dark ahead. Why, I do believe the fog is clearing." It was. The light increased every moment and made him blink. The fog lifted. He was in an utterly unknown valley, and the sea was nowhere in sight. Here we can see Eustace beginning the first of his own private adventures, from which I'm sure he will be emboldened, embiggened, and enlightened. But for now, he's just a pasty kid, lost in a strange new world. Oh, Eustace Clarence Scrubb, may Aslan protect you from your own foolishness. And that is the end of our story for tonight. Oh. Well, that was fun. I like doing the 2 in a row. I kind of miss it. Although I think Mr. Lewis's methods certainly have developed over the years, and this book's chapters are definitely girthier than those we were encountering in his first novel for children, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Thursday long day. Yeah, that was nice. And by now the sun is even set, so it's actually started to cool down a little bit in here, which is so lovely and pleasant. Yes, a good hearty cliffhanger indeed, Marin. We'll be back next Monday with chapter, I guess it'll be 6. And let's see, is it a spoiler to tell you what the chapter 6 will be called? No, it isn't. It's bang on. Chapter 6 is called The Adventures of Eustace. So we'll get to follow along with everybody's favorite conservative 9-year-old for a little bit longer. Before he is... maybe, hopefully, rescued by Caspian and the gang. Nevertheless, that is the end of our story for this evening, folks. I hope that your weekend brings you many opportunities to better yourself and those around you, that you are restored and refreshed, and met with just enough novelty to keep things interesting, but not so much that they are overly exciting. That's my wish for your weekend. Take it or leave it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. As always, feel free to spread the word. I haven't been plugging the show through Facebook or Twitter as much recently because it has seemed a rather difficult time for self-promotion. It's so nice to have this little core of folks that are here to hang out with and wind down with at the end of the night. So thanks again for hanging out and enjoying the stories with me. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope you'll tune back in next week. Until then, this is Brother Bedtime saying good night, moon, and good night, stars. Good night, trucks, and good night, cars. Good night, shoes, and good night, hats. Good night, dogs, and good night, cats. Good night to friends and to family. Good night to you, and good night to me. Sweet dreams, everybody. Have a great weekend.